All in Small Collection, Season 2, Chapter 34, and Everyone Needs a Little Hero, Chapter 22. Saving Our Hero, Part 1. "Look here, Dorian," Ashlynn said as she pointed out another comment that just came in. "Hey Dorian, I just came across your music and I have to say I'm impressed. I don't know where you draw your lyrical inspiration from, but dude, you rock. Oh, want to release an album? Hit me up and I'll help with the cover art." "What?" asked Dorian. His head was completely spiraling at this point. "You're kidding. Oh, this is... Oh..." Dorian rubbed his temples as he stared at the squiggly words on the screen. This was absolutely amazing. How could this be happening to him? What did he do to get so lucky? She reached over again and gently cupped Dorian. He leaned into her touch, wrapping his left arm over her middle finger and squeezing tightly. He wished, in that moment, that he could tell his mother and father about his music. He wished they could be proud of him, and, in a way, Ashlynn helped fill that void, as did his brother, Zoran. "Well, music man, we've got to get you some better studio equipment if you're going to release an album," grinned Ashlynn. Dorian looked up at Ashlynn, feeling the threat of salty tears starting to gather in his eyes. "Really? You're serious?" he asked. Ashlynn nodded. "Serious about what?" asked Zoran. Ashlynn and Dorian looked over at the edge of the couch to see that Zoran and Maisie were chasing a dime. Zoran had undoubtedly rolled it so Maisie could toddle along beside it. She was giggling the whole way and watched as the coin rattled to a stop by the leg of the couch. Ashlynn glanced at Dorian and gave a thoughtful head nod to Zoran. "Want to tell him?" Dorian, heart still pounding out of his chest, nodded shyly and slid down Ashlynn's arm to lean over the edge of the couch to see his oldest brother. "My music," he said. "The last song I released is doing really great, and loads of people are asking for an album. Isn't that great?" Ashlynn, knowing Zoran, was obviously suppressing a hint of worry as he smiled up at his younger brother. "Dorian, that's great news. But how..." started Zoran. "Don't worry, I haven't released any pictures of me or anything. They only know my voice. There are loads of anonymous artists out there. None of them have to know about me or that I'm a borrower," smiled Dorian, already trying to ease his brother's apprehensions. The smile on Zoran's face broadened as he once again picked up the dime and rolled it. Maisie squealed with delight and chased after it. Zoran looked up at Dorian, the eldest brother's eyes beaming with pride. "Well, Dorian, this is amazing. I'm proud of you. You're pursuing your dreams and making them happen," said Zoran. Dorian, unable to help himself, reached up and wiped his eyes free from the little bit of moisture that had gathered there. Ashlynn watched as Zoran quickly scaled the edge of the couch, stepped up onto the couch, and walked over to embrace his brother. Zoran began speaking to Dorian, but Ashlynn couldn't quite make out what he was saying. She smiled and watched the two of them interact. Despite recent events, things were finally leveling out and starting to swing back their way. Ashlynn closed her eyes and listened to Maisie's giggling as she continued to chase the dime across the floor. As it rolled to a stop, however, Maisie's giggles subsided. Ashlynn, not wanting to intrude on what Zoran was saying to Dorian, carefully got up and maneuvered around the table to find Maisie and continue the game of roll the coin. It was then that Ashlynn heard Maisie's voice again, but she was not laughing anymore. There was a momentary, curious coo before Maisie whimpered and started to cry. Ashlynn leaned down and saw Maisie was by one of the electrical sockets. Her arms were tucked tight to her chest, and she was stepping backward. Ashlynn couldn't see the electrical cover from where she was, but whatever Maisie was sensing wasn't good. "Maisie, it's okay. Come here, sweet girl," coaxed Ashlynn, not wanting to reach out and snatch the young borrower toddler, in case it freaked her out more. Maisie, whimpering, toddled out from under the piece of furniture guarding the electrical cover and climbed onto Ashlynn's outstretched hand. Ashlynn leaned over to peer under the piece of furniture, but it was a bit dark for her to make out any details. Then she noticed a shadow. Her heart jumped into her throat as she watched a small figure staggering forward. Before she could get Soren's attention, however, she heard a familiar sob and watched as Ray stumbled out from under the furniture piece. Ashlynn was instantly mortified. It was Ray. He was covered in several large drops of blood smeared across his body. His clothes were torn. He was clutching his side as though he were severely hurt, and his breath came in sobbing gasps. "Ray?" Ashlynn's panic was obvious as she reached forward and managed to catch Ray's swaying body before it hit the ground. He curled into her fingers, doubled over as he dry heaved violently. "Ray, what happened? Are you hurt?" With another sob, Ray managed to shake his head as Ashlynn stood with Maisie in one hand and Ray in the other. Ashlynn felt her insides drop as she stared down at the young borrowers. What happened? What was going on? Was Ray attacked again? Rage threatened to boil over as she stepped carefully up to the couch. Dorian and Soren broke from their embrace and looked over at Ashlynn, instantly picking up on the change in the air. "Ashlynn, is that Ray? Is he okay? What's going on?" called Soren as Ashlynn crouched and set Ray and Maisie down onto the couch. Soren's eyes widened as his whole body went stiff. He rushed over and snatched up Maisie to help calm her down as he crouched in front of his youngest brother. Ashlynn sat next to the couch, so she was at eye level with the borrower family. The anxiety was tangible in the air. "Ray, you're okay," encouraged Soren as he held his brother and his daughter tight. Both were now huddled on Ashlynn's fingers. Ray sobbed once again as he clutched onto his brother. "You're safe now. It's all right." No," sobbed Ray. It's not all right." Dorian came over and laid a hand on his brother's back. "Ray, who did this to you?" demanded Dorian, feeling his own insides churn. His brother had already been attacked twice. This was too far. If the borrowers in the community were responsible, he knew Ashlynn would be unstoppable. He shuddered at the thought. Ashlynn, seeing Ray continue to tremble, pulled over one of the borrowers' blankets that they kept on the sofa for when they wanted to cover themselves in something their size, and draped it over Ray's shoulders. Soren helped tuck the blanket over Ray and gratefully took the second one for Maisie, who had calmed down as her father held her. Soren felt the way his brother trembled and saw that he was covered in blood. Though, upon further inspection, only a few scrapes where his clothes were ripped were his own. The massive dots of blood were not his. It begged the question of who did the blood belong to, however, which made Soren worry more. What also made Soren worry was that Ray was supposed to be out and about helping Hero. Where was Hero? Was he injured? Was this blood his? Soren waited only for one more minute for his brother's breathing to calm before pulling away from the embrace to look him in the eye. His soft blue eyes were rimmed with pink from where he had been crying. "Ray, I know you're upset, and I wish I could give you the time you needed, but we need to know what happened. Was this the community? Was this someone new? Did you fall? What happened?" Ray's pale blue eyes were swimming with tears. It was obvious he was still distraught, but resolved enough to gaining control over himself. He sucked in a few breaths, nearly breaking back down into tears as he did so, but managed to muster the words before succumbing to another round of sobs. "Hero's been taken." The words hit like a lead brick to the side of the head. It was a stunning blow that no one expected to hear. The stunned silence surrounded them, and it took Ray's choked words to bring them back. Ray was no longer stuttering, but he did have to take a moment to breathe deeply in between words. "There was a human he hadn't seen before. She was crying on her bed. He was on top of the desk before I could stop him. She sat up and saw him." Ray started shaking his head back and forth as he gripped either side of his head, entwining his fingers into his hair. "Soren, I tried to save him. He just slipped. I had to leave to get help." "Ray," said Soren, his voice a deadly serious that Ashlynn had never heard before. "Tell me exactly what happened." Hero stood and looked out across the room at the human girl who was on the bed. He noticed the mascara-colored streaks running down her face. He saw the way her eyes were red-rimmed. He noticed her sadness melt away to curiosity as her eyes met his. The green-eyed borrower teen smiled but cocked his head curiously as he heard her speak. Whoa, Austin was right. Austin? Who was Austin? Someone she knew? This had to be another human, right? She pushed herself off of the bed, smearing the mascara stains on her cheeks as she fearlessly approached the 3.5-inch tall boy. Hero, unaccustomed to this approach, stepped back a few steps before stopping himself. Naturally, this human was curious, just like so many other humans in his life. But Hero's own thoughts were interrupted as she reached forward, pinched his arm, and started to lift. Her grip was harder than he thought it would be, and it pinched his skin terribly. "Egg, ow!" he said as he squirmed, trying to keep his friendly smile while dealing with the unwanted contact. Could you not do that, please?" "And you talk," muttered the girl, who did indeed stop lifting Hero. "This is incredible. What are you?" Ray, who had just made it onto the desk, rolled to the side of what looked like a prop to keep books up, and crouched low. His heart hammered in his chest with merciless force. He could see Hero was obviously at risk of being in extreme danger, but Ray needed to make sure he didn't do anything stupid. He needed to plan an appropriate diversion if he was going to get Hero away from the girl, who now looked more like an adult than a child. Ray was used to not hesitating, but he was now. What had him frozen to his tracks was the name. Austin. Was it possible? No, but maybe. Could it be? Who else would know about them? Austin, the same human who caused those fatal injuries to Ray and Dorian's father, Brady. Austin, the same human who moved in shortly after Ashlynn left and ended up capturing one of Dorian's friends. Austin, the monstrous human who started making and setting little traps for Ray and his family. He continued to tremble as he watched the human girl start to pull Hero off of the desk. Wait, what are you doing?" Hero's panicked voice snapped Ray back to the present moment. "Making sure you don't disappear," replied the girl. She looked away from Hero, scanning the desk, and Ray hid quickly. "Here we go." The girl's hands were inches away from Ray as she reached over and snagged a mason jar filled with permanent markers from nearby. She dumped out the pens carelessly and, in one swift motion, let go of Hero and slipped the jar over his head. Hero, now shaking, went over to the edge and slammed his hands against the glass. What was going on? This had never happened before. Didn't she know he wasn't going to leave? Hey, lift the jar and let me out. I won't leave. The echo was excruciating, and he winced as his words bounced back and pierced his ears. He slammed his fists into the jar, hoping the little tink sound would get her attention. Yeah, right, the girl muttered. Her voice was distorted as she looked around the shelves. I lift that and you'll bolt. That's why I need the lid. Hero swallowed dryly as he looked up at the human girl. The inside of the glass jar was getting stuffy. His vision swam in front of his eyes as he staggered to the side. No, this wasn't happening. This was just a bad dream. He could reason with her. She thought he would vanish like a dream, right? That's why she was keeping him in one spot. The girl cursed under her breath and went over to another shelf to look for the lid. This is when Ray sprang into action. When the girl dumped out the pens, there was a long, straight pin, a broken crayon, and a few popsicle sticks in the mason jar. He stowed the straight pin on his side just in case and stared at the jar. He knew he couldn't get the mason jar up and toppled over in one go, but a couple of quick movements would undoubtedly free his friend. Chest compressing, like he were in a clenched human fist, Ray darted forward when the human had her back turned and knelt at the bottom of the jar. Push hard, he hissed to Hero, making the pushing motion with his hand followed by placing his fingers over his lips to show they needed to be quiet. Hero, mildly stunned, needed to be told twice by Ray that he needed to help before springing into action. 1 hit, nothing. 2 hits, nothing. Just a little more. 3. It was just enough for Ray to slip the wooden popsicle stick under the glass. They did this 2 more times until there was a nice little gap underneath. Ray had the brilliant idea of putting one of those markers underneath, making a kind of lever system. Good. Now, lift on the edge, whispered Ray. He and Hero lifted on the edge of the glass, which was painfully heavy. Ray felt his muscles screaming as he used his foot to slide the next popsicle stick under the edge. Ray, I don't understand. We don't have time to talk about it, Ray hissed again as he grabbed the bottom part of the glass. Now, on 3, we're going to lift. It's probably going to topple over, so be ready to run, okay? Hero paused before nodding. Okay, 1, 2, 3. At 3, Ray heaved all of his weight onto the end of the popsicle stick. The mason jar wobbled uneasily just as Hero crouched. Ray did it again, and, this time, it was just tall enough for Hero to dart out. Sadly, it was just a little too much for the jar. It wobbled and seemed to suspend itself in mid-air before falling off of the desk in slow motion. The 2 borrower boys were already sprinting for the line at the edge of the desk, practically throwing themselves over the ridge as the mason jar clattered onto the ground. Hey! The girl roared as she whipped around and sprinted at the desk. Ray and Hero glanced up just in time to see the human woman's face eclipse over the edge, striking fear into their hearts. Both of them dropped the last few inches to the ground and sprinted under the desk. The electrical cover was just within reach. Hero and Ray sprinted for their lives as they heard the slam of a human's body behind them. Ray glanced over his shoulder and yelped in surprise as he saw 2 massive eyes peering at them from beyond the darkness. 2 hands rocketed toward them, and, before Ray could dodge, he felt his leg being pinched between the human's fingers. Hero's shout of surprise told Ray that he was caught too. Ray felt himself being wrenched backward toward the human. A million thoughts and fears shot through his body like he was suddenly plunged into a bucket of ice water. He shook his thoughts away, just as Soren would do, and suddenly remembered the straight pen. With all of his might, he wrenched himself around, pulled the straight pin from his side, and plunged it into the girl's hand 3 times. 2 more shallow, and 1 so deep that it nearly protruded from the other side of the girl's finger. She screamed in pain and let him go, but still had a firm grip on Hero. Ray scrabbled to seize Hero's hand and held on with all of his might. He hoped that the pain would make the human's grasp loosen on Hero, but her grip held tight as she continued to wrench Hero out from under the desk. Hero's eyes were filled with terror. His heart was skipping every few beats, and he couldn't remember when he last took a breath. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Ray tugged with all of his might and tried to pry Hero's leg free from the human girl, but it was of no use. She continued to pull both of the boys as she pulled the straight pin from her finger using her teeth. Ray, hands wrapped around Hero's arm, felt the human give a harsh tug, almost making him lose his grip. All Ray could think was that this was not going to work. He couldn't save Hero. This was it. His escape attempt was foiled, and there was nothing else he could do. At least, there was nothing he could do for Hero. The girl hadn't reached back to grab Ray at the moment. He still had a chance to get away. Ray, with horror, realized what he had to do. No one knew where they were. The 2 of them weren't expected back for hours. Hero was grabbed and being dragged back to what would undoubtedly be a lidded jar, and Ray would be right there with him if he didn't act. Tears filled his eyes as he stared at his fellow borrower. He would regret this until the day he died, but the alternative was far worse. Hero saw the look in Ray's eyes and, with horror, realized what his friend was thinking. "Ray," he stammered, his voice faltering. Ray, with tears starting to pour from his eyes, kept eye contact with Hero as he said, "I'm sorry. I'll be back." The human tugged once more forcefully. Thankfully, Ray wasn't forced to let go, despite the thoughts he had of letting his friend go on purpose. The force was enough to yank Hero away from him. Ray, scrambling backward, watched as Hero was hoisted away out of reach. He could hear Hero's voice, but the pounding blood in his ears prevented him from hearing anything. One thought drove him: get back to the others. Save Hero, no matter what. Soren listened to the horrific tale and felt his insides drop lower and lower than they had ever gone before. He was beyond grateful that Ray was back safe, even though it was by the skin of his teeth. There was the major issue, however, of Hero. What was the borrower teen going through? Was he being hurt? Treated as a pet already? Was he being questioned? Knowing the boy, Soren worried that he might involuntarily start talking to prevent the human from hurting him, and in hopes the human would understand that they, borrowers, were just like humans. "I'm so sorry, Soren," sobbed Ray as he crumpled in on himself. Ashlynn, absolutely petrified and ruled with rage simultaneously, gingerly reached out and stroked Ray's back in an effort to comfort the teen. Soren shook his head and kissed his brother on the forehead. "No, it's okay. You did the right thing. I know it doesn't feel like it, but you did so well," Soren encouraged. "Do you remember where this apartment is?" Ray nodded feebly. "Yes, but it's not good," muttered Ray as he sniffed and tried to speak clearly. "Before I left, I looked into the other rooms to make sure I knew where I was. I saw boxes in the apartment. I think they're moving out." "Ray, are you sure?" asked Ashlynn. "There is another family moving in. I saw them before. It's a dad, a son, and a daughter." Ray shook his head vigorously as he sniffed again. "No, we saw them, and we were on our way back out when Hero heard the girl crying. She must not have wanted to leave. muttered Ray. It was the only explanation he could come up with. Soren nodded and looked up into Ashlynn's eyes. "Ashlynn, I need you to bring me to the counter if you could, please," said Soren. Ashlynn, mildly confused, stared curiously at him. She felt more concerned than anything at the moment. "Why?" she asked. Soren, with a hefty sigh, nodded and replied, "I need to tell the Rafters that their son has been captured," said Soren. Ashlynn's eyes were wide open, and she opened her mouth to protest, but Soren silenced her with a glance. "No, Ashlynn, we need to bring them in on this. If the family is moving, we need reconnaissance and as many borrowers as we can spare on this." "I can help too," said Ashlynn. "I can go see who they are and look for any suspicious boxes as they're carrying them down." Soren considered this for a moment before nodding. "Fine, that would work well, actually. If you see this girl, don't confront her just yet. We don't want to raise suspicion. Most likely, she'll remember what Austin told her about us and be ready for some kind of countermeasure. We'll need to get all the help we can get," stated Soren. Ashlynn thought for a moment before making the most daring statement yet. "Well, if you're recruiting, I should too. Hero made other human friends, right? They may be able to help too," said Ashlynn. Soren once again opened his mouth to protest, but seemed to consider it for a moment longer. Okay. You're right. It couldn't hurt. But wait until I get back," said Soren. Ashlynn nodded and carefully moved her hand from underneath Ray to bring Soren to the counter. "I want to help," called out Ray as Soren stepped onto Ashlynn's palm and crouched low, handing Maisie off to Dorian. "Soon, Bobbin, but not right now. Ashlynn, time is ticking. We need to move now," said Soren. Ashlynn nodded and brought Soren over to the counter, bringing him up to her lips and kissing his torso before setting him down. Soren reveled in the warmth and softness of her lips before stepping off of her hand. "I'll be right back. See what you can see and come straight here, okay?" asked Soren. They exchanged a thoughtful look before Soren seized his hook from the wall and vanished behind the electrical cover. As Soren sprinted through the walls, he could only hope they weren't too late, and that they could get Hero back safe and sound. But first, the bigger task was telling the Rafters about their son, and it wasn't going to be pretty.